So do you ever wonder why you see some people posting about the results they are getting from their podcasts, but you are only getting crickets? In this episode, I'm going to share with you what I believe to be the secret sauce of making this happen from what I've learned in my experience of launching over 100 podcasts in the last 2 years for service-based business owners and coaches in the online space. These are the very things that I teach them that have helped many of my clients close high-ticket one-on-one clients in the DMs and sell right into their masterminds and high-ticket programs right from their podcast. So listen up. What's up? I'm Angie, and you are listening to Podcast That Pays, the podcast for online business owners who want to grow their business and sell their offers using podcasting. If you like no fluff, tell it like it is advice from a marketing-loving podcast agency owner, you are in the right place. So glad you're here. Let's dive in. So it's so funny saying secret sauce when I was naming this episode and I was naming it secret sauce. It made me think of Kung Fu Panda and finding the secret sauce for his to unlock his awesome Kung Fu. But that's definitely not what we're talking about here. We're talking about finding the secret sauce to having a podcast that makes you money, having a podcast that actually works for your business. And in this case, the secret sauce is this framework that I'm about to teach you. So I'm going to get into what I believe is the secret sauce for making money with your podcast. This is the same framework that I use to help my clients sign people into their one-on-ones, their high-ticket programs, their masterminds. And so in the next few episodes, I'm going to break down each one of these topics. So number one, positioning. We're going to talk about positioning. Number two, we're going to talk about crafting content that converts, my very favorite topic. Number three, we're going to talk about selling in your podcast. And number four, we're going to talk about making your podcast a part of your overall strategy, because that is so super important and something that is highly forgotten about and something that a lot of people don't do. So having a framework and being intentional with your podcast is the number one thing you need to be doing. So what I see people do so often is they approach podcasting and they have no idea what to do, what their purpose is, what's happening, any of that, right? And so I've created this framework, which I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to give you an overview in this episode of the entire framework first. And then I'm going to break down each one of these pieces in subsequent episodes. So for the next 4 or 5 episodes, stick with me and you will get the entire framework that I feel is what you need, the secret sauce, what it takes to really turn your podcast into a lead generation machine and to help it work for your business, okay? So why don't people do this? Why don't people approach podcasting in an intentional way, right? So most people who come to me, one of the first things that they tell me, and it's the first red flag, the first sign, is they come to me and they're like, you know what, I really want to start a podcast because I want to be able to say all the things that I can't say on social media. I feel like I get so, I have to be so focused on talking about my business, and I have to worry about everything has to be content for a purpose. And I really just want to talk about blah, blah, blah. And most of that blah, 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 it typically is stuff that has nothing to do with their business. So they're coming to me and they're saying, hey, I want to start this podcast for my business, but then they don't want to talk about their business. And this is real life. This is true story, folks. This is the true story. And for me, I'm okay, that is so cool. I understand that. I respect that. And that is totally fine if that is something that you want to do. But it all depends on what your goals are. So if your goals are to have a podcast where you get to talk about everything that you don't talk about in your business, don't expect to come in and have people be excited about your business, because you have come to me telling me that you don't want to center it, right? So number one is what are you expecting? What do you have to come with the intention of, I'm going to use this for my business, and you have to create it for your business. Okay. Now, if you want to, it's all good. You want to create a podcast where you can talk about all the things, cool. Just don't have the same expectation, right? And I get that desire to want to talk about more things because you're getting on a mic and it's fun and it's exciting. And I promise, and I tell this to my clients, like I have a knack for helping people like do things that actually really work for them and their business and actually still have fun at the same time, right? So you can do both, and you can talk about like your life and stories and storytell and things like that. But if you want to have one that generates leads and sells into your high ticket offers and your one-on-ones, then you're going to have to like focus on your business, right? You're going to have to focus on using this podcast as a marketing tool. So another reason why people don't go into this with intentionality or having any kind of framework is because they just don't know any better. They just haven't learned. It's like when I started podcasting, I had no idea. Like I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea about intentionality, about frameworks. I kind of just happened to get lucky, to be honest. I did a lot of the right things early on without a lot of guidance, which it's like I mean, the best way to say it is I just got freaking lucky, okay? So I did a lot of these things that I still teach, but a lot of people don't do these things. And so there is a hard learning curve. Like there is a learning curve. You have to learn your new audience. You have to learn this platform and how your audience consumes the content. You're learning the buying behaviors of your audience on this new platform. So this is why it is actually beneficial to hire an expert, because what you're doing is you're cutting out that learning time. You're cutting out that learning period where you're going to get on here, you're going to flail around, you're going to waste a lot of time creating a lot of stuff that does not, it might feel fun to create, but after a while, it doesn't feel so fun when you're not getting the results that you want to get, right? Hey, if you're listening to this and you're thinking to yourself, I really need to up my podcasting game, or you want to start utilizing your show more for your business to get more leads and sell more offers, then I want you to come over to podcastthatpays.com and check out the Podcast Collab Lab. That's podcastthatpays.com and check out what we're doing over there. I would love you to join us. Okay, back to the show. And then another thing is why people don't come into this with intentionality and like being really focused on their business is because a lot of people are worried about leaving people out. And they're worried about like, you know what, down the line, I think I'm going to shift and talk about XYZ. I think I might like want to talk about like right now I'm a podcast coach and I'm talking about podcasting, but like later I want to talk about building your business and I want to talk about like marketing principles. And so we don't want to leave anyone out, or we're like making this podcast for 5 years down the road. Like we can't pivot, like we can't like change our minds. Like we have to do this like finite thing. And that's another thing that keeps people from starting and makes people feel overwhelmed in the beginning too, right? So why is it important to have a framework, to have something with intentionality, a strategy going into creating your podcast, right? And this is, I'm specifically speaking to people who want to generate leads, who want to make money from their podcast. I'm specifically speaking to these people. So one of the most important reasons is so that you can attract the right people. Like we want to be attracting the right people. So if you don't have this framework, if you don't have the intentionality going into this, you're not going to be attracting the people that you are wanting to attract into your business, okay? And, you know, it also, when you go into it with intentionality, when you go into it with a solid framework and a solid strategy, it makes it a lot easier for your marketing. Like I will never understand why people hate niching down so much. Like, I mean, I get it, like creatives, like naturally, and I'm an entrepreneur. And naturally, like it gets boring and I get it. But when you niche down, when you are really intentional about like what this is going to be about, who this is going to be for, it just makes it so much easier to market. When you're really clear, then you can send a really clear message and it actually just makes it easier for you, right? And it's also important because clarity, simplicity, and repetition are key ingredients to helping you sell your offers in your podcast. Very, 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 very key. And so if you don't have clarity of who you're talking to, if your podcast doesn't have clarity, it has to have simplicity, right? It can't be all over the place, and repetition. So talking about the same thing sometimes, talking about it in a different angle, sharing your offers every single episode, like stuff like that. Those are like key ingredients to help you sell your offers in your podcast. And you'll definitely need each and every one of those things, okay? So let's get into a little bit more into those things that you are going to need which remember, I said positioning, crafting your content that converts, selling in your podcast, and making your podcast a part of your overall marketing strategy. Those are the 4 things that are included in the secret sauce. Okay, so let's get into each of those things and kind of talk about what each one of those are as an overview. And then after this one, we're going to go a little bit deeper so that you can really have a better understanding of each one of those things. And just so you know, this is exactly how I teach my clients to set up their, frameworks and talk about like what they do and highlight what they do. We do this overview episode first, and we talk about like what this is about and do an overview. And then we, do an episode each one after for, going a little deeper for each topic. So the first topic let's get into is talking about positioning. So positioning includes naming. It includes knowing who you are talking to and being easily identifiable. So that means that when people see your podcast, when they see your podcast cover art, they should be able to raise their hand and say, oh yeah, this is for me. Like this person is talking directly to me. Okay. And that's important because a lot of times you just have that split second. I don't know what the actual like number of seconds is, but it is an actual number of seconds, like research, data of like the amount of time that you have to actually capture somebody's attention. And so we want to make sure that we're positioned in a way that someone can easily raise their hand and say, I know this is for me. So this is why like when we talk about naming, I'm always like, please don't name your podcast after yourself unless you're like Oprah. Because although you can, this is if you want the ingredients, the secret sauce to a podcast that's going to get you leads quicker, it's the straightest line to point A to point B. It's like, how do we name this in a way where the people who are looking for what I'm offering can easily identify with this and they want to purchase this, right? Or they're going to want to buy from me, or they're going to be able to know that this is exactly for them. So that's positioning. It's like being easily identifiable. It also has to do with like having your finger on the pulse of like what's the most current need that your clients have right now. What is it that they want to hear? What is it that you need to say to them? What message do you need to get across? Like, if you're a business coach, like maybe instead of having like the business coach podcast, how about we attack a particular angle of business coaching? Like maybe it's like we're talking specifically about offers because maybe in the in the industry, that's the thing that's like really struggling right now. And we want more people to we want to appeal to like what's going on in the industry. Or maybe if you're a marketing coach, maybe you focus in on maybe doing an AI podcast. Like I've just been kind of crazy about AI and all the things that are going on with it and everything that you're going to be able to do with it. Because it's like timely, okay? And like, yeah, sure, maybe later on down the road you can rebrand or you can open up your topics. You can talk about more, more than just AI. But in the beginning, that's going to give you the best chance is being really specific and positioning yourself like in that need that your people are having right now, okay? The next part is content, which again, it's my favorite topic. And it's because it's the most important. So your messaging and positioning, I mean, they go like really closely hand in hand, right? So like if we are talking about AI, like that informs a lot of the messaging that we get to put into our content, like what people are feeling, what's going on in real life for them right now. And then also positioning yourself as the answer to what it is that your people are really needing or wanting in this moment. And also, part of content is just like understanding your audience and understanding, again, where they are and creating content that meets them where they're at. And really doing that in a way where you are inspiring people to take action, where you are shifting beliefs. Your content is less about 3 ways to create your perfect podcast now. And it's more about how we are shifting people to believe that they need or want something. So here in this episode, for instance, this is like, I'm telling you, like my goal, okay? So if I get it wrong, I get it wrong, but this is what I'm trying to do. It's to convince you to shift your belief from, I can go into this however, to like really understanding that if you do go into this with a solid framework, with a solid strategy, you can have the results that you're wanting to have. You can. So that's the goal of this, right? And so that's why we're like giving examples, and that's the goal. I'm not necessarily talking all about like, here's exactly how you do this, like step 1, step 2, step 3. Because again, you have to understand your audience and how to craft content that your audience is going to want and need and get them inspired to want to listen and take the next steps, right? And then you need to also create content based on what you're selling. Like, I know that's not like a groundbreaking concept, but it can be. So I just did a strategy call with someone for their second season, and we based the whole season around the mastermind that's going to be launching around the same time as we're going to launch the second season. Like, that makes sense, right? Like, it's silly to think that we would not do that, but you would just be surprised. I'm not surprised anymore, but you'd be surprised at how many people are creating this random content that has nothing to do with like what's going on in their marketing calendar, what's going on like in their business or what they're trying to sell. So when you create content in this way, all those things that I talked about, that is going to be like your winning way ingredient. And when we go into the content episode, I will actually break down and tell you exactly how to do this and what I do with my clients. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you. Usually I'm not into the like teachy part of here, but this part, I'm going to be teachy. So if you go skip or you go listen to that episode, you need to be prepared to like learn some shit, because there's going to be lots of nuggets. And then the next thing that you need in the secret ingredients is selling. Jesus Christ. This is the part that makes me like giggle the most. Okay. Not to like poke fun, but I have so many people who come to me and they're like, can you help me make money on my podcast? And I say, okay, let's go take a listen. Let's go see what you're doing. Okay. And to my not surprise anymore, in their podcast episode, they don't sell anything. They don't talk about their offers. I don't even know what they do, to be honest. Like, after their episode, I don't know what you're doing. Like, I don't even know what you actually do in your business. And I have no idea. You never talk about your offer. And maybe, in the very end of your episode, at the very last sentence of your outro, you share that with me. Maybe then, right? And I'm like, why are you putting your offer, your thing that you want to sell, the whole purpose of your podcast, in the very end of your episode? Like, if you were to get a sponsor for your podcast tomorrow, I can guarantee you that they would not put their offer at the end of your podcast episode. By the way, they're going to put it at the beginning, they're going to put it in the first 25%, and they're going to put it in the first 50%, or they're not going to want it there. Okay. So why are you putting your own stuff back there? But that's how it always is. They're afraid to do a commercial. Like, oh my God, my people are going to be so offended that they're listening to this free content and there's a freaking commercial in it. Like, oh my God, I can't do that. So they're like, it's kind of funny. They're really scared to talk about their offers, or they don't know how to talk about their offers, and nobody knows what they're talking about. So selling in your podcast is going to be so key, and knowing how to do that skillfully and actually knowing how to do that unafraid and straight up dropping your offers is obviously one of the most important parts of this, like, making money from your podcast thing. But, I digress. We'll talk about that more later. And then the last part is making your podcast. This is the last part of the special sauce in the framework, is really making your podcast a part of your overall marketing strategy. And so, primarily for my agency, we help people launch their podcasts. And so we don't get to do this part really until after, when someone comes back to us for like a second season, or they sign on with us for like a year long, and we get to really work together on their marketing strategy and their podcast. This part is really the key to turning this into a lead generation machine. Because when you're launching a podcast, like, a lot of the focus is on like, let's get a bunch of eyeballs, let's get some reviews, let's get like this content put out there. But once you get the content put out there and you get the hang of like recording and your production and like how all of this fits together and what's going on, right? Once you get the hang of all of that, then we get to go deeper into, okay, now how do we take each podcast episode? How do we share this? How do we get all of our content from social media and now, tie it back to our podcast? How do we get our content from our podcast? And then how, once we post it, do we drive people back to our podcast? How do we incorporate our podcast into, our offers? So like, what are we offering throughout the year? Like, that's how we should be creating all of our podcast content around. What are we saying in our podcast that supports, what we're trying to sell? Creating blog posts, how do we make this into like a comprehensive full marketing strategy that goes where it incorporates into everything else that we're doing in our business? And let me tell you why I think that is so important. It's because the number of people that I see quit podcasting, this is really why. It's because they haven't figured out how to incorporate your podcast into what you're currently doing. And so it's this extra thing that you have to do. You're spending extra time. You are, it feels like a lot for maybe a little return because you're not doing it. You haven't figured this framework out. You haven't figured it out. So you don't know what you're doing, right? And so maybe that's why it's holding you back. I kind of lost my train of thought there, by the way. But they haven't taken the time to make the podcast part of the overall strategy. So they quit because they're like, it's not working. But it actually is working and can be working if you incorporate it. And it's so important to do it so that you don't quit, because it can be such a great addition to your marketing. Okay. So like I said, in the next couple of episodes, we're going to go over each one of those even more. This is like the overview of the secret sauce of like what it takes to have a podcast that is going to make you money in your business. I love talking about this. And like, thank you so much for being here. Come over to my Instagram at Angie M. Jordan and let me know what you think about this episode. Let me know what you think about the podcast. Come say hi, whatever. I love it when people drop into the DM straight from my podcast. It is like truly, truly, truly one of my favorite things. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Hey, if you enjoyed the show, head over to podcastthatpays.com to get started on your way to creating a podcast that pays. And don't forget to follow this show and take a screenshot that you were listening and tag me on Instagram at Angie M. Jordan. I'd love to meet you and show you some love over there. Thank you so much for being here. I love you. Let's get this money.